The legendary Mac Wiseman here on MusicChartsMagazine.com. Mac is a member of the Bluegrass Hall of Honor. He's the newest member of the Country Music Hall of Fame, and now he is the oldest living member of the Country Music Hall of Fame as well. Hi, everybody. I'm Big Al Weekley with MusicChartsMagazine.com, and we're going to take a look at this very special career of the great Mac Wiseman. Mac, I want to take us back in time to the days of Mac Wiseman from out in the Shenandoah Valley, Virginia. Is it true when you were a young guy playing the guitar, did you play a guitar out of tune for a long time? Was it a preacher that came by and tuned up your guitar?
You're exactly right. I had a very modern guitar. It's one of those $3.95 jobs from Sears. Had a neck in it like a wagon tongue, and there's nobody in the neighborhood that I could depend on. We got books and tried to tune the darn thing, and finally this preacher came and held a revival in our community, and it was customary back then they'd stay with different parishioners, you know, and he stayed with us a few nights and found out that I had the guitar, and he tuned it up for me, and it just sounded miraculous to me. But when he left, it was out of tune before he got out of sight, I think.
Well, Mac, what was it like for a young kid back in Virginia? What did you do, throughout the day? Was it just music? Did you all work on the farm, or what did your family do?
My dad was a flour miller. I was born 25, and along 27 and 8 through there, he was doing extremely well. He had a Model T Ford truck with solid rubber tires on it and was hauling for the highway, making $9 a day for him and his truck. And by golly, in 1930, the Depression hit, and next year he couldn't buy tags for his car or the truck, and they sat behind the barn and rusted into the ground.
Oh, my goodness.
So it just broke his spirit. But we had moved back to my mom's old home place where she was raised, and that's where I was raised up till the time that I left there to go out in the wild, wild world. And but we had a little old 65-acre farm, 2 or 3 cows, a couple of horses to work with. Didn't have any tractors and stuff like that, but
yeah, we
raised all of our groceries. About the only thing we bought at the little country store was coffee or sugar or something like that, and we traded eggs for those because money was a short item at that time.
What kind of entertainment did you all have as you were growing up?
I just wrote a book, my autobiography, and I was pleasantly surprised and pleased that I had tremendous recall of back when I was 4 and 5 years old, and I could substantiate it by where we lived at different times. Of course, at the same time, I can't remember what I had for breakfast now. But my dad had one of the first hand-wound table model phonographs and one of the first radios in our community. Had a lot of old records and the old ballads, the story-type songs, some of them of English origin, Scotch-Irish and such as that, were my favorites, and I still know them today. A lot of those old songs, I've recorded some of them. But that was the greatest influence on me. It was just a way of life for me, and my mother played the old pump organ, and could read shaped notes, but my dad just had a love for music. He could sing a little bass in the church choir or something like that. But I had no influence as far as the guitar until I was, I guess 9, 10, 11 years old, something like that.
Let me give this title here and see if you remember this guy. It's called History Repeats Itself. Do you remember that song?
I remember it well, and I knew the fellow very well that wrote that and had the big hit, Buddy Starcher.
Yeah, I knew that you would probably remember Buddy, and I think you worked with him for a period of time, didn't you?
Yes, I did, and he was a great influence on me. We remained friends till he was up in his 90s when he passed away, yeah. He was on the local station there in Harrisonburg from time to time, and we became friends and acquaintances, and later we just became real close friends. in retrospect, I think Bradley Kincaid was one of the greatest influences on me back then. Because he sang the old ballads and stuff like that. I had the great pleasure of becoming acquainted with him in later years.
So you were a radio announcer, what, it was around 1944?
Yeah, I went to the Dayton Shenandoah Conservatory of Music there in Dayton, Virginia, just out of Harrisonburg, majored in radio, and it was taught by the local program director on the radio station. It was during the war, and one of his key men was drafted, so he offered me a full-time job at the radio station, and since that's what I was majoring in, I just jumped at that, and I did disc jockey work and read the news and did just a little bit of everything you do at a 1,000-watt daytime station, you know.
Well, they certainly do it a little bit different these days, Mac. You've got computers and all this stuff that come in, and you don't have to look outside to see what the weather is, and you don't have to go out to the neighbor's house and try to get the community news. It all comes to you.
Yeah, back then our weather forecast, we stuck a finger out the window. If it got wet, it was raining.
That's the way we used to do it back in my hometown. We would look at the newspaper and see what the weather was, but we'd also look out the window and see if it was a blue sky or had clouds.
That's exactly right. Yes, sir.
You were in radio. You worked a little bit with Buddy Starcher. Man, what a great guy for putting together ballads. And then you worked for Molly O'Day. Is that who you really got your career started with, was Molly?
Well, that was the first time I break into the so-called big picture, I guess. I worked with Lee Moore quite a bit there on that Harrisonburg station. And then in the fall of 1946, I went to work with Molly down at Knoxville and was with her, close to a year. And then that opening came up in Bristol, and I organized a band and went up there. 1947, and then when Flatt and Scruggs left Ville Monroe, they called me, and I organized with them. I was a charter member of the Foggy Mountain Boys, and I took them to Bristol in 1948, and that's where we worked and did their first recordings with them.
What was it like traveling the roads at that point?
Back then, there were no interstates, of course, and there were a lot of mountain roads and stuff. You'd run your battery down blowing at your own tail lights, you know. But it was pretty hairy back in those mountain roads. We would go to the theaters and Grange halls and high schools and grade schools more than anything else. We played shows in a lot of courthouses because it was the largest auditorium in a little town, you know.
And what did those folks pay to come in and see you?
I believe we was charging 25 and 50 cents at that time, and no guarantees. We worked on percentage all the time.
Well, how did you survive? Did you guys carry groceries with you, or? No,
we'd stop at the service station and gas up to go back to Bristol on, and we'd get bologna and crackers or cheese and crackers or canned sausage or stuff like that. And that was because there were no fast food places to eat in, you know.
Right. When Lester and Earl and you and some of the other entertainers at that point in time, were you working hard to make country and bluegrass music the top music, and also at the same time did you realize you was going to be a part of something that would affect history later on?
Oh, I couldn't possibly dream that big. Listen to Roy Cuff and Uncle Dave Macon and Pete Bradley, as I mentioned, and stuff like that. And but back then, quite frankly, along about the mid-40s around, it wasn't the most reputable thing you could get into. And when I went to high school, I majored in courses like bookkeeping and typing and such as that, hoping to be a CPA, because it was a barter system back then. The entertainers would drift through town, and the stations didn't pay any money, but the entertainers would have their services free on the air, and the station in turn would sell airtime to the local merchants, the tire companies or whatever, And it was up to the entertainers to build up enough listening audience that they could go out and play the schools or other little venues around, you see.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's about what it was. It was just kind of a nip and tuck, I'll tell you that.
Let's talk a little bit about the business side that you were a part of with history, because a lot of things that you did changed history. I know you're a member of Rope.
I was president there for 5 years, yeah.
And I also know that you were one of the first executives, I believe, if my memory serves. Now, I don't have a lot of notes here. I'm doing this on my head. With the CMA. So correct me if I'm wrong about that.
I am the only living member of the original board of directors of the CMA, and I was the first secretary and treasurer. And we formed that in 1958, which I feel very proud of, and I'm the only living member of that original board of directors.
So what was the idea when you put together the Country Music Association? What was the directors and the board? What was Nashville like at that time? Was it kind of unorganized and in chaos, and you all decided, well, we're going to have to change this to keep an organization?
No, it was the era of the beginning of the top 40 radio station formats, where they would play, like, when they say top 40, they just play 40 records all day, rotate around and play them again, you know. Mm-hmm. And the whole business was built on relationship between the record companies and the radio stations. And the record companies were floundering because they had so many young people in responsible places, such as music directors, such as that they didn't know one from another. And the reason we had to found that Country Music Association was to let people like William Morris Agency and the radio stations as well know that they were playing country records, Marty Robbins, Don Gibson, and Eddie Arnold, but they were considered country music. They were selling spots on them mm-hmm. and advertising, but they didn't realize the impact that country music had on the industry. One of the things we would do, we'd go to Houston and Chicago and Pittsburgh, and even went into New York City, and we'd take some entertainers and go there and create a luncheon or a seminar or something and invite the country. More for an educational or get acquainted situation, you know. Mm-hmm. When we went to New York, for instance, I got a Tennessee walking horse for a door prize up there, and that got their attention. I have been very fortunate. I've done a lot of touring in England and Ireland and Netherlands and Germany and places like that, and sold a lot of records in Japan, and Canada was very, very good for me. Per capita, they were as good as the States for me.
So really, what you and the other directors had designed with the Country Music Association, and you especially having the knowledge that you did because you took all that in school, then you're Mac Wiseman, the entertainer, so you took all that business with you on your tours, and you were able to take that around to the other states.
The height of my recording career was from 51 up to the late 50s when the top 40 came in, as I say. Mm-hmm. And in 57, Dot Records, who had moved to Hollywood, called and offered me a job as the A&R man to come and build their country and western department. Mm-hmm. So I went there and did that, and then moved back here to Nashville, which was the original plan, and represented them here between the publishers and recording companies and things of that nature, you see.
Right.
So that was my business experience with it. But we had top-notch people. Connie Big, for instance, was our first president of the CMA, and Harold Moon, head of BMI in Canada, Jim Denny, and just on and on. Hubert Long, of the people who've been around long enough to remember those names, realize what a varied board of directors we had, you know. Started from scratch because we would go into those markets I just told you about, and we'd go to our own expense, and quite often there at the first, we'd have board meetings and have to take up a little collection on our own to pay our postage and things of that nature, you know. Yes, sir.
Well, it's a lot different today, isn't it, Mac?
Oh, it is. Yeah, it's all big business, you know.
Jimmy Brown, the Newsboy. This was a big song for the Mac Wiseman, the entertainer. Where did that song come from?
Well, it was an old Carter family song, and was just called Jimmy Brown. Flatt and Scruggs had recorded it, a number of other people. It had been one of those borderline things, almost hit, but never quite make it. And my distributor here in Nashville called that to my attention, and I was doing a folk album. So I did that little minor change and stuff to make it more folksy during the hootenanny days, if you recall.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what the difference was. Incidentally, I don't know whether you YouTube or not, but Jimmy Brown's got over 250,000 hits on it. So that was where it came from, and I put it in a folk album, and it got so much airplay that we put it out for a single, you know.
In those days, let's say the Carter family decided they were going to record it. Let's say Bill Monroe decided he was going to record it, but Mac Wiseman had already went in the studio and recorded it. Did everybody have a lot of respect for each other in those days of the younger years of bluegrass and country music?
Well, I feel that they did. We respected each other, and each had something to offer. And even though we do the same song, we do our individual style of it. You follow me?
Yes, I do.
In fact, back when King Records had Hawkshaw Hawkins singing like Tubb and Haskell Hankins singing like Acuff, they approached me and wanted me to record like Bill Monroe. And I wanted on the record so badly I would have given my eye teeth, but I held out because I wanted to be myself, you know. In 46 and 7 and through there, it was still quite a rural situation to be in the country business. Because, like I say, it was all on percentage. And you go out in good weather, you'd have, and we all worked on a split. Nobody got salaries. If we 5 in the band, we split the proceeds, our part of it, 5 ways, you know.
Mm-hmm.
After taking out the cost of the car and the posters and things like that. Then as wintertime rolled around in those tri-state areas like West Virginia and Southwest Virginia and eastern Kentucky and Tennessee, if we could get to the venues, people couldn't, back in there, couldn't get to it to see you, you know. And so I'm not stressing the truth. It was a number of times that time we took out expenses and got back, we'd be lucky to stop at a fast food place or a restaurant, a night restaurant, and get a hamburger or something, you know.
To all those years, too, you had got polio back when you was a boy. So how did that affect you, Mac, growing up? Evidently, you just overcame it and went on, because look who you are today. I mean, what a great legend that you are. But tell me a little bit about polio, if you don't mind talking about that.
Well, I don't ever remember having anything else. I contacted it when I was about 6 months old, and I was 2 or 3 years old before I walked, which was way beyond when the normal child would walk, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And the right leg never developed quite as much as the left. It's an inch and a half shorter and quite a bit smaller and such as that. But I worked on farms, and I was determined to do my part or outshine somebody else, you know. And so that's the way it was. And then when I was about 13 years old, I had some corrective surgery done on it, and helped a lot. And it's still a little awkward today, but it's not much pain, and I can get around quite well with it, you know. But I worked on farms and in factories and picked berries in the mountain and just about anything that you had to do to make a living, you know.
You've done so many things, it's kind of hard to try to cover everything that Mac Wiseman has done. You even narrated the documentary High Lonesome.
Yeah, sure did.
Do you enjoy doing that kind of thing?
Oh, I really did. they'd come around to different festivals and done footage or interviews and things for a couple of years, and I thought perhaps they had sidetracked the project, you know. And out of the blue, they called me and said they just started editing it, and they felt like my voice would fit what they needed for the voiceover, so I went to New York and did the entire voiceover on that.
Wow.
And Ken Burns, as did the specials on the Civil War, the baseball, and a number of other things.
Mm-hmm.
He's doing one on country music at this time. It won't be out till 2018 because he's got a couple of projects ahead, Vietnam and a couple of other things. But they came down from New Hampshire just 4 or 5 weeks ago and did a 2 hours live interview on video with me on that project. So I'm sure they won't use a whole 2 hours, but they'll use quite a bit of it, no doubt, you know.
Like the song, I've always wondered, Mac, another big song for you, 'Tis So Sweet to Be Remembered. Where did you get that song? Where did that song come from?
I have no idea where it came from. A neighbor lady, gave me that sheet music one day when I was on my way to the midday merry-go-round in Knoxville. She was a neighbor of mine and came out and gave me this old song. We put that in it, and I couldn't read music that well, so I had the violinist out of the local band to teach it to me. And I used it for a theme song for many years, and I was really frightened to death that somebody recorded before I did because I knew it was a hit. We recorded it. Dot Records couldn't find out who had written it, so they copyrighted it and put it in my name and put it in their publishing company. And they called me, though, and told me about that, so we can't find out who that song belongs to. So it said if we ever find out, we keep accurate records and we'll just pay them what we've garnered on the way, not try to steal it, but just protect it, you know.
Right, right.
Nobody has ever come forward and claimed it or anything, so I own the copyright on it, but I have no idea where it came from. Great things happening. I just recorded a new CD, did 12 sides in 6 hours on a new label, Wrinkled Records. They have B.J. Thomas and people like that on it. And this came about after my induction into the Hall of Fame. But I recorded those. It's not a bluegrass, but it's all acoustic, Jimmy Capps and people like that.
Oh, yeah.
And we did songs from the 30s and 20s and 30s is what these songs are. Some of them I never have recorded before.
Are they going to put the history or the liner notes in with the album, too?
Yeah. And where they came from, my mother, in the wintertime, it was nearly all live radio at that time, and few disc jockey shows because the record companies didn't send country records to the stations, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But she would take a composition book and sit beside the radio and do her quilting or crocheting or whatever, and the local people would come on and sing a song, and she'd get several lines or a verse or something and lay the composition book back up. A few days later, they'd sing the same one. She'd write a little more of it down. And I have all those composition books in her handwriting, some 12 or 13 of them.
Wow.
And that's where we got the material for this album, songs from my mother's hand. And that's what we stuck to. I did a lot of them in lower register because I wanted them more folksy-like, you know.
Yeah. So how long did it take you to cut this album?
We did 12 sides in 6 hours.
Okay, that's what I thought you said, because that's the old style. You just go in and do it. It's not like I take nothing away from any of the big entertainers or other big entertainers that it might take them 6 months to do an album. And Mac Wiseman just goes in and cuts it, and that's the way it is, huh?
Right, that's right. And we just took a skeleton crew in because that's the secret of it. We just had a couple of guitars, a dobro, and a bass, and then we later overdubbed dulcimer and a harmonica and things of that nature, mandolin, and just for a few lines here and there, through it.
So when is this album going to be released, Mac?
It'll be released in September to coincide with the induction into the Hall of Fame, the medallion ceremony in October.
How do you feel about that, being inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame?
Well, I'm just blown away. I don't mind telling you that. I'd just about given up ever making it. I'd been in the top 5 a number of times, but had never made number 1, so I was as surprised as anybody else when it did happen.
In your career, Mac, do you have one thing that really stands out in your mind that you might think of from time to time in your country and bluegrass career?
A couple of the business transactions I think would be most important to me, or most remembered, and one of those was becoming an A&R man for Dot Records, because at that time, Dot was one of the very first of independent labels. And I tried all the major labels and couldn't get on. They turned me down. And But Dot came along, and that gave me a chance. I was one of the first individuals before Chet, and some of those people became producers,
Really?
And and then the other was the being on the original board of that Country Music Association, because I think I helped the industry and carried the ball, so to speak, and maybe set an example for some other people. But a few of those things, of course, playing Carnegie Hall didn't hurt. I played that twice, and Hollywood Bowl, and Newport Folk Festival, and all the folk festivals during the Hootenanny days, Philadelphia, Mariposa. And I've worked all the states with the exception of Hawaii, and all the provinces of Canada and British Columbia.
Mac, it's been a pleasure visiting with you about your career, and we also want to congratulate you on being one of the newest members of the Country Music Hall of Fame. Thanks for taking the time to be with us here at MusicChartsMagazine.com in Nashville, and we're going to finish up with one of the songs that we talked about in our visit with you. That song is called "'Tis So Sweet to Be Remembered." Here is the legendary Mac Wiseman, the newest member of the Country Music Hall of Fame. For MusicChartsMagazine.com here in Nashville, Tennessee, I'm Big Al Weekley.
As I travel o'er this world just to suit my roving mind, and the messages I get from a dear one left behind, they were filled with sweetest words that so touched me when I heard, there, oh there, can I forget, these are some things that she'd say.